Everyone thought she married him for the money. After all, who agrees to wed a cold, wheelchair-bound tech tycoon she barely knows? But no one could have guessed that her love would be the miracle he never believed in. When Arya agreed to the marriage, it wasn't for love, it was survival. Her mother's life hung in the balance, and he offered salvation at a price. But behind his cold eyes was a secret, one that would shatter everything she thought she knew about loyalty, legacy, and love. Hello, my beautiful family. Would you risk everything for love, even if it meant giving your heart to someone who may leave you broken? Tell us in the comments below. And if you've ever believed in second chances, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us. This story will leave you breathless. Just in case you're new here, please hit subscribe so you wouldn't miss another beautiful episode. Now let's begin. The steady beep of machines echoed in the hospital room where Arya Morgan sat, fingers curled tightly around her mother's frail hand. The fluorescent lights did little to soften the harsh truth of their reality. Her mother was dying, and there was nothing left to sell, pawn, or borrow. Arya had already taken double shifts at both her waitressing and cleaning jobs, but even that barely made a dent in the rising cost of treatments. Every time the doctor walked in with sympathetic eyes and new bills, Arya felt like she was being slowly crushed beneath the weight of helplessness. Hope was shrinking, until the call came. It was a voice she didn't recognize, a woman with a clipped tone asking her to appear at the Westbrook Tower the next morning. No further details, just a time, a place, and a name: Darius Westbrook. Arya showed up in her only pressed blouse, heart pounding. She had heard of Darius Westbrook. Everyone had. He was a reclusive tech billionaire, brilliant but cold. Rumors swirled about his sudden retreat from the public eye a few years ago, after an accident left him unable to walk. Since then, he ran his empire from a glass tower, rarely seen and never touched by scandal. As she was ushered into his private office, Arya braced herself. The space was sleek and intimidating. And then there he was, standing despite everything she'd heard. His frame was tall, his posture perfectly still as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling window. Dark hair, silver-threaded at the temples, chiseled jaw, gray eyes that seemed to calculate everything. Cold, unreadable, and powerful. When he finally turned, his voice was deep and even. "I'll be brief," he said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. "I need a wife." Arya blinked. What? "I need someone who can help me fulfill a legal condition of my inheritance. It requires marriage, not love, not companionship. A signed document, a joint life in name only, and in return, I'll erase every debt you have and ensure your mother gets the care she needs." Arya felt the room tilt. She wanted to laugh, cry, scream, but all she managed was a quiet, "Why me?" Darius's gaze didn't waver. "Because you have nothing to gain but everything to fight for. That makes you loyal." It was an insult and a compliment tangled in one. And it worked. Arya stared at her hands, trying to slow her racing thoughts. Her mind ran through images of her mother's tired smile, of collection notices stuffed in drawers, of nights crying herself to sleep. Then she looked up and met Darius's eyes. "What are the terms?" He handed her a document. In black and white: marriage, 1 year minimum. Discretion, privacy, eventual children, an heir. In exchange, freedom from financial ruin. Her fingers trembled as she signed her name. Darius signed next without emotion. Then, almost as an afterthought, he extended his hand to her. "To a new chapter," he said. Arya took his hand. It was warm. The wedding was over in 15 minutes. No vows, no flowers, no emotion. Just signatures, witnesses, and a gold band slid onto her finger in a courthouse that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Arya stared at the ring later that night in the back of the sleek black car that chauffeured them to Darius's penthouse. It shimmered under the city lights, beautiful but heavy. Like a lock, the penthouse was everything she expected: imposing, elegant, cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sprawling skyline, and every detail screamed wealth. But none of it felt lived in. It was all too perfect, too curated, like a magazine spread. Darius showed her to the master suite and then, without a word, took the side of the bed furthest from hers. The silence between them echoed louder than any conversation could. In the days that followed, Arya moved through her new life like a guest in a stranger's home. She was given everything: a car, a platinum credit card, access to her mother's top-tier care. Darius kept his word. But what he gave in material comfort, he withheld in human connection. They barely spoke beyond essentials. Breakfasts were short, polite exchanges over black coffee. Dinners, when he was home at all, were were quiet affairs filled with silverware clinking and long silences. He never touched her, never lingered, never asked about her feelings. Yet, in the shadows of his stoic composure, Arya began to notice things. One night she woke to soft murmurs and found Darius caught in the grip of a nightmare. He thrashed slightly, a sheen of sweat on his brow. Without thinking, she reached out and whispered his name. He jolted awake, breathing hard, eyes wild, until they met hers. For a second, Arya saw it, the fear, the vulnerability. Then it vanished, replaced by that impassive mask he always wore. "Sorry," he said, turning away. "Bad dream." But Arya couldn't forget that look. Another time she saw him pause at the elevator, one hand pressed against his chest, his jaw clenched. When she asked if he was okay, he only nodded and walked on. She began to wonder, what wasn't he telling her? Meanwhile, her days became routine. She visited her mother often, helped her adjust to the new clinic, and pretended everything was normal. She told no one the truth about her marriage. To the outside world, she was Mrs. Westbrook, the lucky girl who had captured a billionaire's heart. But there was no love here. Still, Arya found herself watching Darius when he wasn't looking, studying the way he moved, the faint sadness in his smile when he looked out over the city, the way his hand lingered on the edge of a photo frame she'd never seen turned outward. One evening, after yet another quiet dinner, she asked, "Do you always keep everyone at a distance?" Darius looked up, startled. Then his expression shuddered. "It's better that way." "For whom?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. And yet that night, he didn't retreat to the edge of the bed. He lay beside her, silent still, but closer. The silence between them had started to shift. It began with a home-cooked meal. Arya had grown tired of the sterile quiet that clung to every corner of the penthouse. One afternoon she rolled up her sleeves, searched the fridge, and decided to do something different, something real. She made rosemary chicken, roasted vegetables, and a small bowl of lemon rice. The aroma filled the space like warmth had finally entered it. When Darius returned that evening, he stopped in the doorway, surprised. "You cooked?" She nodded, unsure whether he'd approve. "I didn't poison anything, I promise." A faint, startled smile tugged at his lips. "That's reassuring." They ate together at the long dining table usually reserved for quiet silence. But that night, between bites, conversation flowed, halting at first, then gradually easier. He asked about her mother's progress. She asked about his company. He even cracked a dry joke about his board of directors being more robotic than his AI prototypes. When dinner ended, he lingered. She watched him rinse his plate at the sink, this powerful man doing something as ordinary as washing dishes. It made her chest tighten unexpectedly. As she dried her hands, their fingers brushed. He froze, then slowly looked up at her. The air changed. Something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, curiosity, maybe even longing. Neither said anything, but that night, he didn't lie quite so far away in bed. A few days later came the gala. He hadn't asked if she wanted to go, just sent a stylist with a gown and a box containing a delicate necklace. The dress was deep blue, silky, and molded perfectly to her form. When she emerged from the bedroom, Darius, already in a tuxedo, turned and stared. His expression gave her pause. His gaze swept over her slowly, reverently. "You look—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. She smiled, unsure of how to respond. At the event, cameras flashed. Everyone wanted a look at the mysterious Mrs. Westbrook. Arya felt exposed, but Darius never left her side. His hand rested at the small of her back, grounding her. They danced under sparkling chandeliers, his movements graceful, his hold protective. In his arms, Arya forgot the contract, forgot the cold beginnings. For the first time, she allowed herself to enjoy the moment, his warmth, his scent, the softness in his eyes when he looked down at her. That night, they didn't speak on the car ride home. Back in the penthouse, he guided her gently toward the window that overlooked the glittering skyline. His fingers laced through hers. "Arya," he said, voice low, "you didn't have to come tonight, but I'm glad you did." She turned to him, surprised. "Why?" He hesitated, then touched her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin lightly. "Because when you're near, it feels like I'm not just surviving anymore." She didn't answer with words. She reached up, kissed him, and he kissed her back like it was the only thing anchoring him to this world. And in that kiss, something irrevocable changed. The apartment had never felt so alive. Their lips met again and again in the quiet space near the window, each kiss more urgent than the last. Darius cupped her face like she might disappear if he let go, and Arya melted into him, fingers sliding up his chest, tangling into the collar of his shirt. Without a word, he took her hand and led her down the hall to the bedroom. The air was thick with anticipation as Darius turned to face her. He looked hesitant, vulnerable almost, like a man afraid to take what he truly wanted. "You can still walk away," he murmured. Arya stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere." She pressed her lips to his again, and this time, he let go of hesitation. Jackets fell. Buttons slipped loose. Her gown slid to the floor like water. The world narrowed to sensation, skin against skin, breath catching, hands exploring. Darius worshipped her with reverence, like he was rediscovering how to feel again. He kissed her collarbone, the dip of her spine, every inch of her, until she trembled. When he finally laid her down and joined their bodies, it was slow, achingly slow, measured like a man savoring every second he thought he'd never have. She gasped softly, hands braced on his back, and he kissed her temple, her jaw, her lips, whispering her name like it was something sacred. Arya's world shattered into light and warmth. When the pleasure crested and broke, she clung to him, burying her face into his shoulder as tears slipped quietly down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of being wanted, truly wanted, by someone who had been a stranger, and now felt like home. In the hush that followed, they stayed tangled together in the sheets, limbs intertwined, breathing slowing. Darius lay on his side, propped on one elbow, watching her. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed quietly. "Neither do I," she whispered back, "but we can figure it out together." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You make it easy to forget the past," he said. "Even the parts I never wanted to talk about." She didn't push. She just reached for his hand and held it. That night, they slept wrapped around each other. For the first time since the marriage, there was no distance between them, not physically, not emotionally. The barrier had cracked, and in its place was something raw, honest, and unexpectedly beautiful. The next morning, Arya woke to the sound of soft humming. Darius stood shirtless at the window, a cup of coffee in hand, a thoughtful expression on his face. He turned when he noticed her watching and smiled, an unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded, sitting up slowly. "Better than I have in weeks." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "I never expected you," he said. "Not in my life, not in this way, and yet—" "Here we are," she replied softly. He kissed her forehead, then stood. "Well, let's see where this takes us." And from that morning on, it wasn't just survival, it was something like hope. In the weeks that followed their first night together, a new rhythm bloomed. Arya found herself smiling more, at small things, Darius leaving notes beside her morning coffee. Their evening walks on the rooftop garden where city lights blinked like stars. The way his hand now found hers without hesitation. He still wasn't the type to gush emotion, but he was different, warmer, protective in subtle ways. He always waited up if she came home late from visiting her mother. He started asking real questions about her childhood, her dreams, what made her laugh. And Arya answered. Their dinners turned into long conversations, their bedroom into a sanctuary. Their silences now felt comforting, not cold. But underneath it all, Arya sensed something brewing. Darius still flinched on occasion, moments when he thought she wasn't watching. He'd press a hand to his chest, jaw clenched. Some nights, he'd disappear to the study for hours, returning pale and distant. One evening, as they curled up on the couch, Arya gently placed a hand over his heart. "Tell me," she said softly. He shook his head. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because if I do, you'll look at me differently." She leaned closer, resting her forehead against his. "I already do." But he didn't speak further, and she didn't push. Then came the symptoms. Arya began waking up nauseous. Her appetite changed. Her energy dropped, and the world took on a strange, surreal glow. A trip to the clinic confirmed what she hadn't dared to believe: she was pregnant. Staring at the small black and white ultrasound image, Arya felt a flood of emotion. Joy, fear, wonder. Their contract had mentioned children eventually, but now that one was on the way, it didn't feel contractual at all. This was life. Real, messy, miraculous life. She decided to tell him that night. She cooked his favorite meal, lemon thyme salmon, and set the table by candlelight. He arrived home later than usual, his face shadowed and tense. "We need to talk," he said before she could speak. She nodded and sat, her pulse racing. "Okay." He hesitated before finally saying it. "I went to see a specialist today. I've been hiding something from you." The room went still. "I have a heart condition," he continued. "It's genetic, progressive. I've been managing it, but it's getting worse." Aria's breath caught. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I don't know how long I have," he said simply. "That's why I arranged this marriage in the first place. I needed someone I could trust to carry on the name, to build a future for a child I might never get to raise." She stared at him, blinking back tears. "You should have told me," she whispered. "And couldn't. I didn't want to make you feel trapped, and I didn't expect to fall in love with you." Her heart ached at the confession. "I love you too," she said, voice trembling. "And that's why I'm terrified," he admitted. "Because if I die, I'll leave you with nothing but pain." Aria stood slowly and walked to his side. She reached for his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "You're not leaving," she said, "because we're having a baby." His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment he just stared. "Are you sure?" he whispered. She nodded, and in that moment Darius Westbrook, the man who had always held the world at arm's length, fell to his knees before her, not out of weakness, but out of sheer, overwhelming awe. They should have been celebrating. A child, conceived not out of obligation, but from real, blooming love. But instead of joy, fear had crept in and wrapped itself around both of them like a tightening rope. Darius was silent for a long time after the news. Not cold, never that again, but lost in thought. Aria watched the tension return to his shoulders, the way his gaze dropped as if already mourning a future he feared wouldn't come. "I don't want to leave you behind," he whispered one night, holding her as they lay in bed. "Or our child." "You're not going to," Aria said firmly, resting her hand over his chest. "You're stronger than whatever is happening inside you. We'll find a way." She said it with conviction, though her own fears curled deep in her gut. In the days that followed, they met with specialists. Aria sat beside him through long consultations, second opinions, test results. Words like experimental therapy and surgical options filled the air. Some days offered hope. Others felt like the floor had cracked open beneath them. Despite the storm swirling around them, something remarkable happened. They grew closer. Their shared vulnerability turned into a bond stronger than anything the contract could have crafted. Darius no longer held back his fears, and Aria no longer shielded hers. They cried, laughed, and found solace in each other's arms each night, finding pieces of peace in the chaos. But then came the night Aria woke with a sharp pain in her side. It was sudden, jarring, followed by a wave of nausea and an icy sweat across her skin. She sat up with a cry, clutching her abdomen, panic spreading like wildfire. Darius jolted awake beside her. "What's wrong?" he asked, already throwing back the sheets. "I don't know. Something's not right," she gasped. He didn't hesitate. Within minutes, they were in the car, Darius driving through the dark streets like a man possessed, his eyes never leaving her reflection in the mirror. "Hold on, love. We're almost there," he whispered, over and over, like a prayer. At the hospital, chaos greeted them. Nurses rushed Aria away on a gurney. Darius followed until a nurse gently pushed him back. "We need space to work. Please wait here." The doors closed. He was alone. The sterile hallway felt like it was closing in on him. He paced, ran his hands through his hair, cursed himself for letting fear get in the way of joy these past weeks. This baby, this woman, they were everything, and he hadn't protected them. Minutes felt like hours. When the doctor finally emerged, Darius was on his feet in an instant. The physician's face was weary, but calm. "She's stable. It was a threatened miscarriage, but we've managed to stop the bleeding. She needs rest and monitoring. And the baby." Darius choked out. The doctor offered a faint smile. Still holding on. Relief crashed into him like a wave. He nodded, trying to steady his breathing, then followed the nurse to recovery. Aria lay pale against the sheets, her hair damp with sweat. But her eyes fluttered open as he entered. "Darius," she croaked. He dropped to his knees beside her bed and took her hand. "You scared me to death," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You were there. That's all that matters." He kissed her knuckles, then pressed his forehead to her hand. "We're going to get through this. I swear it. You, me, and this tiny fighter inside you. For the first time, he said it aloud, our child, not as a duty, not as a backup plan, but as a dream worth every battle. Hello, my beautiful and wonderful family. If you're still watching and enjoying this story, just in case you haven't subscribed yet, I want you to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Thank you. Now let's continue. The days after the hospital scare passed in a haze of caution and quiet tenderness. Arya was placed on strict bed rest, and Darius cleared his entire schedule without hesitation. His world, once consumed by boardrooms and billion-dollar code, now revolved around one small hospital suite and the woman inside it. He brought her books, hand-picked fresh flowers, and tried his best to cook, though Arya insisted his attempt at scrambled eggs could be classified as a safety hazard. It made her laugh, though, and that alone made every burnt meal worth it. They talked more than ever. Late into the nights, he told her things no one else knew, how his father's death had changed him, how isolation became a shield, how he had never truly believed in love until it stared him in the face and whispered his name. I never thought someone like you would end up with someone like me, he said one evening, brushing a kiss across her fingers. Arya smiled weakly, her hand resting over her belly. Someone like you? Darius, you saved my life, and gave me a future I'd stopped believing in. You saved me first, he said, voice rough. Before I ever touched you, you touched something inside me I thought was gone. And then, as if their son had been listening all along, he arrived. 2 months early. A nurse rushed into the room during a routine check, frowning at the monitor. We need to move now, she said, already signaling to the surgical team. Arya's grip on Darius's hand tightened. You'll stay? She asked, eyes wide with fear. I'm not leaving your side, he promised, kissing her forehead. The delivery room was a blur. Bright lights, rapid voices, and tension so thick it strangled breath. Arya fought to stay conscious as pressure built, as hands moved swiftly around her, as the cries she longed to hear remained delayed. Then, finally, a sharp wail pierced the air. It was small, but it was strong. Darius let out a shaky breath, overcome. He looked down at Arya and whispered, He's here. Their baby, tiny, swaddled, red-faced and beautiful, was placed briefly on her chest before being taken to the NICU. Arya sobbed softly, a mix of joy, exhaustion, and pure relief washing over her in waves. Later that night, with Arya sleeping beside him, Darius stood in front of the neonatal unit's glass wall. Their son lay in a small incubator, hooked to machines but breathing steadily. He placed a hand on the glass, his reflection flickering beside his son's fragile frame. I don't know what kind of father I'll be, he said softly, but I swear you'll never question if you were wanted. Behind him, a nurse approached. Would you like to hold him? Darius turned, startled. Can I? Just for a few minutes, she smiled. She guided him to a chair, helped him adjust the tiny bundle into his arms. And there he sat, his son nestled against his chest, eyes blinking up at him. The billionaire, the man who once believed himself incapable of love, of family, of softness, now holding everything he never knew he needed. When Arya woke hours later, she found him still there, skin to skin with their newborn, whispering stories only the baby could hear. She didn't interrupt. She just watched, tears streaming silently, her heart fuller than she ever imagined it could be. Love had rewritten everything. 2 weeks passed. The days in the hospital blended into a gentle rhythm, nurses checking vitals, machines humming softly, soft lullabies playing from a speaker Darius brought in. Baby Samuel, though premature, was proving to be a fighter. His tiny fists curled with growing strength. His eyes, dark and watchful, opened more each day. Arya, though physically weak, was healing. Emotionally, she had never felt stronger. Each morning, she woke to Darius sitting by her side, either holding Samuel or gently rubbing her shoulder awake with a soft good morning. Love. They were a far cry from the strangers who signed a marriage contract. Now, they were a family. One sunny morning, Darius wheeled Arya out to the hospital garden, her first time outdoors since giving birth. The air was crisp with the scent of new blooms, birds chirping in the hedges as if celebrating with them. Samuel lay peacefully in her arms, bundled in a soft blanket. Darius leaned beside her, one arm around her back, the other gently brushing their son's cheek with the back of his knuckle. You know, Arya said softly, none of this was supposed to happen. I know, he replied, kissing her temple, and I thank God every day that it did. She turned her face toward him, brows furrowing. Your heart. Have the doctors said anything? He hesitated. There's news. The new therapy. It's working. Arya blinked. What? It's slow, but my heart's getting stronger. His voice thickened with emotion. They called it unexpected progress. Tears welled up in Arya's eyes. You mean, you might have more time? He nodded. Maybe a lot more. They're hopeful. Arya let out a shuddering breath. Then, so am I. They sat in silence, basking in that new truth. A future was no longer a fading illusion. It was beginning to feel real, tangible. That evening, back in her hospital room, Darius paced nervously. Arya watched with a tilt of her head, amused. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Trying to find the courage I thought I had," he muttered. Then, he reached into his pocket and knelt beside her bed. Arya's breath caught as he produced a small velvet box and opened it. "I married you for convenience," he began. "But I fell in love with your heart, your courage, your fire. I don't want to live another day as your husband only on paper. I want to be the man who wakes up next to you for the rest of our lives. Arya Morgan Westbrook, will you marry me again, this time because we want forever?" Arya pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome. Then she reached for him, pulling him into a tearful kiss. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit, not just in size but in meaning, and in the bassinet nearby, Samuel gurgled as if in approval. That night, as they lay together, his arms around her, their son sleeping nearby, Arya felt something she hadn't in years. She felt safe, seen, whole. 3 months later, under a sky brushed in hues of blush and gold, Arya walked barefoot across the manicured lawn of the Westbrook estate, her ivory gown flowing in the gentle spring breeze. The garden around her was alive with color, roses blooming in thick clusters, petals dancing in the wind, and strings of lights swaying above guests gathered to witness not a merger, but a vow born of devotion. This wedding wasn't a contract. It was a celebration. Only close friends and family had been invited. Her mother, now healthy and vibrant, sat in the front row, clutching a lace handkerchief and dabbing away joyful tears. Baby Samuel rested peacefully in a bassinet nearby, his chubby cheeks rising and falling with each soft breath. Darius stood beneath the white floral arch, his charcoal gray suit perfectly tailored, a boutonniere matching the pale lilac tucked behind Arya's ear. He wasn't the icy, distant man from that first proposal. He looked at her now with full heart, full presence, and full certainty. When Arya reached him, he took both her hands in his and kissed her knuckles gently. "You take my breath away," he whispered. The officiant smiled, then began. But when it came time for vows, Darius spoke without looking at any note. "I built my life on logic, control, certainty," he said. "I thought love was something fragile, something for other people. But then you walked into my office and undid every truth I believed. You've taught me to feel, to hope, to live. And today I promise not just to love you, but to choose you. Every morning, every night, in fear, in joy, in every breath I take." Tears shimmered in Arya's eyes. She steadied her voice and began. "You saw me when I was invisible. You gave without asking. But more than anything, you gave me you, not the CEO or the name, just you. The man who kissed my forehead when I was afraid. The man who held our son with trembling hands and whispered stories into the quiet. I never thought I'd have a family. And now I have everything. I vow to stand by you, not just as your wife, but as your safe place, your strength when you falter, and your joy when the world grows dim." Their lips met in a soft kiss, no longer the hesitant spark of strangers in a business deal, but a slow, deep connection sealed by time, trust, and transformation. Applause rippled gently through the garden. Later, as the sun dipped and candles flickered in lanterns, Darius held Arya close during their first dance. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder and murmured, "You know what I realized today?" "Hmm?" she asked, resting her head against his chest. "That miracles don't always arrive the way we expect them. Sometimes, they walk into your life with a desperate look and a borrowed blouse, and they change everything." Arya smiled, lifting her gaze to meet his. "And sometimes," she replied, "when they're wrapped in tiny blankets with the same eyes as their father." They laughed softly, and somewhere nearby, Samuel cooed in his grandmother's arms. That night, as stars scattered across the velvet sky, Arya and Darius danced not for show, not for duty, but for the sheer joy of loving. Freely, deeply, and forever. A year later, the Westbrook penthouse no longer echoed with emptiness. Gone were the sterile silences and untouched decor. The space now pulsed with life, Baby laughter, soft music, and the quiet rhythm of a home built on love rather than obligation. Samuel had grown into a curious toddler, all wide eyes and wobbly steps. He adored following Darius around the apartment, tiny feet chasing after polished shoes, reaching for his father's hand with chubby fingers. And Darius, once the man who never let anyone close, now carried his son proudly on his shoulders, pointing out the skyline with playful commentary. "See that building?" he would say. "That's where Daddy used to think he had it all. Until he met your mom." The words always earned a warm glance from Arya, who often watched them from the kitchen while making breakfast, her hand resting absently on her belly, now round with the unmistakable shape of new life. This time, not one, but two. Twins. It had taken them by surprise, but not with fear. Arya and Darius had grown comfortable in unpredictability. They had weathered storms and danced in sunlight. Together, they had rewritten their story from contract to covenant. At the next checkup, the doctor confirmed what Arya had suspected. 2 healthy heartbeats, strong and steady. Darius was quiet the whole ride home, one hand never leaving hers. That evening they stood in the nursery, still half-painted, still filled with boxes, and imagined what the room would look like filled with 3 small souls. Arya turned to him, her brow creasing. "Do you ever get scared?" He didn't lie. Every day. "But I've also never felt more certain about what? That we'll make it, you and me, and our chaos of love." She leaned into his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat beneath his shirt. "The one the doctor said might give out, the one now stronger than ever. You know," she whispered, "I think love healed you." He smiled down at her. "You did." Time moved on. By the time the twins arrived, a boy and a girl, Samuel was running around in tiny sneakers, proudly announcing to anyone who would listen that he was now a big brother. The delivery was smoother this time, no fear, just joy. Darius held both babies in his arms, one on each side, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. Arya sat in her hospital bed, watching him in awe. "You're glowing," she teased. "I'm outnumbered," he replied, grinning. "And I've never been happier." They named the twins Elias and Grace. The press tried to catch glimpses of them, of course. Rumors still swirled about the mysterious CEO who'd once lived like a recluse, now seen at parks and cafes with a woman who looked at him like he'd hung the moon. But Darius didn't care. His empire thrived, not because he worked harder, but because he had something real to protect now. Love had given him a reason to dream. And Arya? She no longer looked at the penthouse like a cage. It was a castle now, built not of stone and glass, but of shared glances, whispered laughter, and tiny feet running through polished hallways. As the seasons turned, so did their story, growing not in grandeur, but in grace. And on quiet nights, with 3 little ones asleep, and the city lights beyond the windows, Darius would hold Arya close and whisper the same truth, over and over. You were never the plan, but you became the reason everything changed. Years passed. The Westbrook name remained stamped on software, innovation centers, and philanthropic foundations. But what truly carried it forward wasn't fortune. It was family. Darius never returned to the isolation that once defined him. His days began not with stock reports, but the sleepy voices of his children tumbling into their parents' room. Samuel, now 7, Elias and Grace 5, each one carrying a piece of his heart in their smile. Their mornings were chaos wrapped in joy, burnt toast, cereal spills, missing socks, and Darius loved every second. Arya would often catch him standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, just watching his family with a contented stillness that spoke louder than any declaration. He had fought his illness with every tool science could offer. There were procedures, therapy, careful routines, but love had been the turning point. His heart had stabilized. His doctors called it a miracle of response. He simply called it Arya. Together, they had created a new tradition. Each year on the anniversary of their second wedding, they visited the same quiet spot in the hospital garden where Darius had first knelt with that second proposal. They brought the children now, turned it into a picnic. It wasn't just a memory, it was a reminder that even the most unlikely love could root itself and bloom. One afternoon, while the kids played tag around the tulips, Arya and Darius sat on the blanket, her head resting against his shoulder. "I used to be afraid I'd lose everything," he said quietly. She glanced up. "And now, I wake up every day knowing I've already won." They watched Samuel chase Elias, who giggled uncontrollably, while Grace tried to organize them with an imaginary clipboard. The air was full of laughter and the sweet scent of spring, You know what I realized recently? Arya said, brushing a petal from her lap. What's that? That the girl who walked into your office all those years ago, she didn't know what she was really signing up for. He raised an eyebrow, amused. And if you had, I would have still signed, but maybe I'd have asked for a kiss up front, she teased. He chuckled and leaned over to give her one now, gentle and familiar. They sat in silence for a while before Darius reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. He handed it to her. What's this? She asked. Something I've been working on. For our kids. Arya opened it. Inside were letters, dated, handwritten, addressed to each of their children. Notes about life, love, loss, and hope. His heart, captured in ink. She flipped through the first few pages and paused, tears threatening. These are beautiful. They deserve to know who they came from, he said. Not just from money, but from choice. From love. Arya wiped a tear and pulled him into a hug. You've already given them everything. He kissed the top of her head. I just want them to understand that even the hardest beginnings can turn into the most extraordinary endings. And as the sun dipped below the skyline and their children ran barefoot through the grass, Arya knew their love story wasn't just theirs anymore. It was a legacy. It had been 10 years. The Westbrook name still rang out in boardrooms and business journals, but what Darius valued most wasn't his legacy and profit margins. It was the story he wrote each day with Arya and their children. Their estate had grown, not in size, but in life. The once pristine halls were now marked by fingerprints on glass, crayon drawings taped to walls, the sound of pianos being plunked by tiny hands trying to find music. Darius walked slower now, not from illness, but from peace. He didn't rush anymore. He didn't live on adrenaline or fear. He lived for moments, tucking Grace into bed, watching Elias build impossible towers from Legos, reading old sci-fi novels beside Samuel, who had developed his father's hunger for knowledge and his mother's steadiness. One afternoon, Darius and Arya stood on the balcony outside their bedroom, the warm wind brushing their hair as they looked out over the city that once defined his identity. He slipped his hand into hers. Do you remember the girl who walked into my office and didn't flinch when I offered her a contract instead of a ring? Arya laughed softly. She was desperate and terrified, but she saw something in you she couldn't explain. She saved my life. Arya leaned against his shoulder. And you saved mine. They stood in silence, listening to the children laughing downstairs with their grandmother, who had recovered so fully that she now led storytelling sessions every Sunday for the neighborhood kids. Can I tell you a secret? Darius asked. Arya turned toward him. Always. I never thought I'd make it this far. I didn't think I'd see our children grow, or hold your hand through a decade of mornings. But you did, she whispered. You chose to fight. And love gave you the reason. He smiled. And the strength. That evening after dinner, the family gathered in the backyard for what had become a cherished ritual. Family story night. Arya would read a favorite tale, the children sprawled across pillows, Darius beside her, one arm around her waist. But this night was different. Arya handed Darius the leather journal he had started years ago. You read it, she said. Tonight, it should come from you. He looked hesitant at first, then opened the book and began. My dear ones, he read, his voice calm and warm. There was once a man who believed he needed no one, and a woman who believed the world had forgotten her. But destiny has a funny way of ignoring what we believe. It simply gives us what we need. The children listened, wide-eyed, as he told the story, not with exact names, not in obvious detail, but in heartbeats and truth. He spoke of risk, redemption, sacrifice, and love that began in desperation but grew into something unshakable. When he finished, even the children were quiet. Was that real? Grace asked. Darius smiled. Every word. Samuel leaned forward. Was that you and Mom? Arya reached over, running a hand through his hair. What do you think? Samuel looked thoughtful. I think it was about how love changes everything. Darius felt his heart swell. That night, after the kids were asleep, Arya and Darius sat by the fireplace, wrapped in the soft hush of a house finally quiet. She turned to him, eyes full of reflection. Do you ever miss the man you were before? He shook his head. That man was lost. I don't miss him. I thank him for having the courage to find you. Arya leaned in and kissed him softly, slowly. And I thank the woman who said yes when she was terrified. They stayed like that, foreheads pressed together, breaths shared, while the fire crackled beside them and the life they had built glowed all around. Their story, once stitched in necessity, had become a masterpiece of heart. Autumn arrived with golden leaves and a quiet kind of magic. The estate glowed under amber skies, trees shedding their colors as if nature itself was honoring the season of reflection. Darius stood on the porch in a cozy sweater, sipping tea while watching Arya and the children rake the yard, though, truthfully, more leaves ended up tossed in the air than into the piles. Laughter rang across the garden, free and contagious. He wasn't the man who once stared down from glass towers, distant and disconnected. He was present, grateful, and more alive than ever. The heart condition that had once threatened to take everything had long stabilized. While he still had to check in with doctors every few months, the danger that once hung over them like a storm cloud had lifted. Not by some magic fix, but through resilience, breakthroughs, and love that refused to surrender. Inside the house, a new wing had been added. A warm, sunlit space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace, and a piano Samuel had begged to learn. Family photos lined the mantel, one from their second wedding, another of Darius cradling the twins in the hospital, and one of Arya asleep in a rocking chair, baby Grace in her arms, sunlight catching the soft smile on her face. That room had become the heart of their home. Later that evening, the fireplace crackling, Arya sat beside Darius, their hands interlaced as they looked through a scrapbook the children had made. On one page was a crayon drawing of 5 stick figures, one with big glasses Samuel's edition, 2 holding hands Arya and Darius's, and 2 smaller ones with curly hair clearly representing the twins. Our family, Arya read aloud from the shaky handwriting below. Drawn by Grace. Darius chuckled. She got my nose right. And my hairline, Arya teased. He kissed her temple. Perfectly exaggerated. The kids came bounding in moments later, pajamas rumpled, books in hand, all begging for a bedtime story. Arya took Elias and Grace on her lap, while Samuel nestled between his father and the arm of the couch. Darius opened the book and read aloud, his voice soothing. They drifted off one by one, warm and safe in the cocoon of togetherness. Later that night, with the house quiet once more, Darius and Arya stepped onto the balcony. The sky was littered with stars, the world below a sea of calm lights. He pulled her close. Do you know what I wish for? Arya looked up. Tell me. I wish every soul could know what it feels like, to have a second chance, to not just survive, but live. She rested her head against his chest. You gave me that chance too. No, he murmured, holding her tighter. We gave it to each other. They stood there a while, breathing in the cool night air. And as the wind rustled the trees, the same trees that once watched their early silence and distance, it now whispered something new. Love endures. Love builds. Love transforms. It was a quiet Sunday morning, one of those rare ones where time slowed just enough to feel sacred. Darius awoke to the scent of cinnamon and the soft clinking of dishes downstairs. Arya's laughter floated up from the kitchen, followed by Samuel's voice correcting Elias on how to crack eggs like a professional. Grace sang to herself in the background, her voice a high, sweet melody. He lay in bed for a moment longer, letting it all sink in. This life, this warmth, was his. The man who once stood alone behind boardroom glass, afraid of closeness and bound by control, now lived in the center of chaos and love. His children had painted his office walls with their handprints. His wife had turned his guarded heart into a harbor, and he would spend the rest of his life proving he was worthy of all of it. He made his way downstairs, stopping at the threshold of the kitchen to watch the scene. Arya, in a faded robe, her hair messy from sleep, was flipping pancakes while balancing a giggling Grace on one hip. Samuel sat at the island counter scribbling in a notebook, and Elias, shirtless and proud of it, had batter on his cheeks. Darius crossed to her, kissed her cheek, and whispered, How did I get this lucky? Arya smiled, because once upon a time a very serious man made a very outrageous proposal, and the most beautiful woman in the world said yes, he murmured. They kissed briefly, the kind of kiss rooted in years of knowing, years of weathering storms and sharing sunrises. When they broke apart, their children groaned in mock horror. Gross, Elias muttered, but he was grinning. After breakfast, they took a walk together through the park near their home. Leaves crunched beneath their feet. Arya leaned into Darius's side as the kids ran ahead, chasing each other in spirals of laughter. They stopped at a bench, and Darius sat with a sigh. Arya joined him, her hand finding his instinctively. He pulled a small envelope from his jacket. What's this? She asked. A letter, for later, for... Whenever the time comes. Arya's heart tightened, but she nodded. You've already given me everything, she said. No, Darius whispered. Not everything. There are still more sunrises, more birthdays, more laughter. But I want you to have this for someday. She tucked it into her coat pocket without looking. Beside them, the children shouted, Come play. Arya stood, tugging Darius to his feet. And just like that, they ran, laughing and breathless, into the field of gold and green, a family wrapped in joy. Years would pass. Their children would grow. Their hair would turn silver. The mansion would echo with grandkids' voices one day. But one truth would remain through it all, that a love born out of necessity, sealed in silence and tested by fire, could bloom into something lasting, something sacred. And when people asked what saved them, what turned a cold contract into a living vow, Arya would smile and answer simply, it wasn't the deal. It was the choice to love anyway. Did this story stir something in your heart? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where love arrived unexpectedly, disguised as duty, risk, or even discomfort, only to become the greatest chapter of your life? We believe love isn't always loud or poetic from the start. Sometimes it begins in silence, grows in shadows, and flourishes when we least expect it. Arya and Darius's story reminds us that healing isn't always about medicine. Sometimes it's about connection and the courage to choose someone, not just once, but over and over again. Now, it's your turn. Would you have said yes to that proposal? Have you ever had to choose between comfort and sacrifice? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story moved you in any way, do us a small favor that means everything, like this video. Share it with someone who believes in love's second chances. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but leave a mark. Because here on Love and Twilights, every story is a reminder. Sometimes the most powerful vows are the ones we make in silence.